Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show. Ty Champ, who we've missed for a couple of weeks, Concordance, who we've missed for a couple of months, and Aussie, who's sort of like stood in a way. So welcome, gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
It's good to be here, just like I was here last show. If if I was missed, then I must not have been really on.
Perhaps you were muted.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm struggling with technical issues at this end, and also with two cats who are becoming hyperactive. The one technical issue that I have is that one of the features that I'm sure the majority of our audience are familiar with is the question and answers feature, which I did set before we started, and I did so before the charity event. But for some reason, the Q&A on this computer is simply not working. It used to then work on the other computer, but that computer is now also not using the Q&A, or it's not functioning on that computer. I would very much like some advice about what to do. But if you're going to tell me to clear history, clear the cache, and or reinstall Chrome, trust me, I've done that I think 3 or 4 times now. It's still not working. And what happens, so you understand, when I press Q&A, a little yellow bar appears over the Q&A thing saying, problem contacting server. So if anyone can help me on how to address this problem, please do so. I understand that one or more of our panelists may be able to access that function. I'm not entirely sure about that. So if you are able to use the Q&A, hopefully one of our panelists will be able to see what you're asking, and we'll be able to address that. But for now, I'm going to invite Concordance to raise the first of 2 issues that we have. The second relates to something we finished off the last show with, which is ISIS. We are coming on to that. That will be our second topic, but Concordance is going to introduce the first topic, whilst I still struggle around to try and make sure things are working at this end. Concordance, what have you got for us?
Yes, somebody help Grandpa with the Windows. I'm hoping you're able to open up the website that I wanted to highlight. One of the conflicts, I think, within our community is between, I would call them, compatibilists and incompatibilists. And the division falls along the lines of people who feel that, say, science, rationality, and religion can be made compatible, that a dialogue between the two sides is a productive and positive use of time. And those who feel that the gaps, the differences between let's say theists and theists and non-theists, or sort of science and religious belief are not worth really discussing, that there's no productive overlap. And I have to say it's a debate in which I find myself leaning one way or the other depending on the arguments that I'm being presented with. And there's a certain amount of poking fun at each other that we do within this community. This is one such situation. The website that I'm hoping we'll be able to pull up is it's called I believe it's Patheos, if I'm understanding that correctly. Yeah, if you would.
Would you like me to do it now?
Yeah, please.
Yeah? Okay.
Please.
I'll try, grandson.
I think it's the mouse. Try unplugging the mouse and plugging it back in. Blow on it.
I've posted the link in the comments under the YouTube video.
Thank you.
I can't actually now see what's being broadcast.
Okay.
But is that, can everyone else see this page?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. There we go.
So non-profit status, which obviously is a little pun, a little play on words, but this is I would say an accommodationist website. It's founded by Chris Stedman, who was interfaith counsel at Yale and previously at Harvard. One of the people who I think would be a leading thought leader in the accommodationist side of this argument. someone who wants to constantly have atheists involved in religious discussions, and vice versa. So what was circulated on Twitter, what made the rounds was this, 10 commandments of, and this is a term that Jerry Coyne made up, faitheists, right? Fatheism, which is the idea of atheists who respect faith as a good, as a moral good. And the 10 commandments of fatheism were things like, thou shalt not offend any faith, thou shalt not give any special exemptions and privileges to all religions, thou shalt not challenge the faith of the little people or minorities, every religion is a race, and thou shalt not be racist. And this is, I think, a counter. And I think there's some good and some bad mixed in here, and that's what I kind of wanted to go through a few of these points and just kind of discuss with the panel what you think of some of these commandments, whether they rub you the wrong way or you agree with them. So the first one here is God probably isn't real. Do we need to discuss that one, or does everyone feel like that's kind of red?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I just think it's a small effort to distance themselves from the oft-used straw man of that atheists are declaring that there's absolutely no gods nowhere, no how.
Yeah. I mean, even Dawkins' little thing was the God probably isn't real, so enjoy your life, right? And that's a pretty good summary of most atheists, I think. All right. Point 2 is attacking people is a bad way to change their mind. And they go into some details on this. It's not a matter of principle. They say it's a matter of practice, of empirical observation, that people are unlikely to be persuaded, and here we're talking statistically, not in anecdotes or in the specifics, but people are less likely to be persuaded by a message for which they have very strong defenses, right? That this idea of harsh proselytizing or ridicule or those kinds of strategies is probably not as effective as engagement and discussion and charity, intellectual charity, to use Ozzy's phrase. Any comments on that?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I'd certainly agree with it.
I would not agree with it.
Oh, good.
Because I think that the word attack can be interpreted too liberally to mean that any criticism of your view is an attack. Now, if you're not going to criticize someone's view, and if criticize it means attack, then there won't be any dialogue. It will be simply a standoff saying, okay, I respect your right to take that opinion, to accept that point of view or whatever, and that would be a nonsense. I think that although the word attack seems to be quite aggressive, I don't think there is any other way to approach it. You've got to address the issue.
Although I think it reads that attacking people is a bad way. I think that, and we're actually sort of in the right corner of the world to be talking about this, because this YouTube Google Plus community, the now so-called Great Debate, is often we spend time, oh, what an idiot this guy is, and there's a. I wonder if that isn't what's being addressed here. Like, obviously, attacking the issues has to be done. Like when you've got people that want to bring creationism into the classroom, I mean, you've got to stay on top of that stuff and go into that full throttle. But then the issue is it helpful? Well, let's bring up our favorite punching bag, Nephilim Free, the perennial guys here year after year. If we're going to now have a discussion about, well, how are we going to convince Nephilim Free that God isn't real? Well, calling him an idiot and a fucktard probably doesn't help us convince him that God is real. And I hope people see how silly that observation is, because I think that those guys make a mistake when they think that we're engaged in some sort of an effort to convince them. We're not, that's what I find kind of an odd observation here, is it says attacking people is a bad way to change their mind. And I would have to agree with that as a principle and as something that you can observe from just your interactions with people. But I would hate for someone to misinterpret that to mean that there's never good cause to call out somebody as a dimwit or a destructive person, Last episode we were talking about this fellow that spreads misinformation about a government conspiracy and scientific conspiracy to kill black people and usher in a new world order and stuff like that. I mean, there is value in attacking those people and their stated positions and their histories and their just mental weirdness, not because we think it's going to help us change their minds, but because it helps showcase, look, milquetoast believers, this is the type of person that you don't want to be aligned with.
I honestly, I think I think there's a very good, as you say, it's conditional. There's a very good point to be made here, and it's been made before. Lawrence Krauss very famously said the "Don't be a dick" speech. I think it's true that people have mental defenses against things that are external to them, they're foreign to them, they find threatening. And I think that any discussion has to meet the other person halfway intellectually. There has to be some agreement to a common set of ideas. Let's agree that we both value what is true. If we can't agree on that, then what's the point in having the discussion? Is it more important to you that your faith be validated, or that we honestly investigate this issue? And if you can't, there's no meeting of the minds on that, then yeah, it's a pointless endeavor.
As I see it, it's a matter of social intelligence. I mean, there's a prodigious literature that now shows that if you enter into a discussion with someone and you come in sort of guns blazing and attacking their most cherished and heartfelt beliefs, the walls go up instantly, and you are much, much less likely to get concessions out of them, reasonable concessions that they would otherwise make if you adopted a different posture in approaching them. Nobody likes somebody sort of getting right in their face at the start of a discussion. We all know that discussions have a tendency to go that way, but if you sort of start that way, sort of in a kind of all-out attack, either critical of the person or characterizing their views in the harshest possible terms that you can come up with, characterizing it as insanity, or alleging that they're systematically irrational, or something like that. When you come in, even if that's your view, I think it's okay to actually hold your cards a little closer to your chest and say, let's see where I can get with this person, and never mind talking to that person, to anyone within earshot who's looking. One doesn't look like the most rational and sensible and dispassionate person committed to the norms of rationality and critical thinking when one comes out looking and sounding like one is motivated by anger and hostility. You end up looking like the one who's wedded to a belief and possibly animated by hostility, not by a sober assessment of the evidence and the reasons. So I just, from the standpoint of social intelligence, I think if you want to persuade people, either the person you're talking to or onlookers, I think a more subdued approach is actually helpful. That doesn't preclude you from getting your dander up if the situation calls for it. That can happen. It happens to everybody. But I think if you sort of start off amped up a little too high, it's actually very counterproductive, and you distance people who might otherwise make concessions or agree to your point, and you actually move people away. And this ties into a point later on in this list that Concordance has mentioned, of a stereotype that we atheists labor under, that we're sort of angry and embittered and hostile and stuff like that. And I think we play into the hands of our intellectual opponents here by living up to their worst stereotypes of us.
That's well said. Can we move on to 3? I think that was well discussed.
Yeah, of course we can. Let me bring up point 3. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see it. But someone perhaps would like to read it out just in case the script is too small.
Sure.
Give the gist of it, at least.
More atheists won't necessarily make the world a better place. So, they talk about the fact that atheism isn't a solution to every problem. That what we really need to think about is, we're not proselytizers. We're not trying to deconvert people, or it shouldn't be a goal that we have, and it won't necessarily make the world better in a universe populated only by atheists, it wouldn't be a utopia as a matter of necessity. So I'll let that one go around.
Well, I've been saying this ever since my first appearance on the Magic Sandwich Show, was that their atheism brings nothing. I think I remember on one show saying something like, we never want to fool ourselves into thinking that atheism itself brings something to the table, right? It's a rejection of their presupposition that, oh, well, we have this book and it tells us this, and therefore there's a solution, and you guys don't have one. I think I said, if you want to understand atheism, start with an empty bucket and then put nothing in it and then get rid of the bucket, because atheism isn't anything. I mean, I think where the great challenge is for secular thinkers in the 21st century is, okay, suppose we do, like, what would happen if you could, like, wave a magic wand? I guess magic wand wouldn't work because it's anyway, irony. If there was some chemical you could spray into the clouds that would make people all of a sudden kind of wake up and drop their unfounded, unsupportable beliefs in things like the Judeo-Christian God, or what would the world look like then? I mean, is that really what we want to have happen? And it would leave us in a set of circumstances. We have a bunch of people that claim that they get moral and intellectual support from their belief in God. So, okay, now as we get more people moving away from that, what other mechanism or technology or social structures or sense of community, like what are we going to replace it with? So, I mean, I wholeheartedly support this point. It's not just an issue of there being more atheists or, less religion in government. It's got, this whole thing is supposed to be an effort towards, moving society towards evidence-based policy and practice. Something. We need to fill in that blank. I think that's the challenge.
I heard a counter-argument to this, and I'm stealing this from, I've forgotten the guy's name. I'll just steal it anyway. We could say the same thing about belief in witches, right? Are we better off for not believing in witches causing whatever, horrible magical spells? Are we better off not believing in that? Well, yes, I think we are. I mean, we're not persecuting witches that don't exist. We're not having witch trials. We're not burning people at the stake. So the lack of belief in that does actually reduce suffering for at least some people. So I think, objectively, you could say, yeah, it's a better world without a belief in witches. And I think you could probably say the same thing about battings, religiously motivated battings. Not having those is, I think, a better world than one in which they exist. If that's the outcome, then yes, that's measurably positive. But that outcome could potentially be offset by negatives as well. So I don't think it's a clear picture of what that world would be like. I also agree that we shouldn't be proselytizing. I don't see that as deconverting people. I don't want that. I want to teach people good, rational thinking, skeptical process, not necessarily a particular outcome from that process. So that's my perspective on it. Ozzy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I don't think the world is going to be made a better place simply because we populate it with atheists. I mean, not believing something is not going to move your hand to act. It's what you do believe. And so if you just get rid of people's religious beliefs, and then they stop believing in the God of the Abrahamic faiths, but they start believing in a lot of New Age twaddle, or medical quackery or anything like that. That's not any better. That's not going to be a better world. So yes, we can, of course, rid ourselves and disabuse ourselves of all kinds of social evils, and we'll be happy to get rid of them. But I mean, there isn't a chance, in my view, that we will get into a more rational world simply by disabusing ourselves of religiosity. It's only if we disabuse ourselves of religiosity for the right reasons, not for superstitious reasons or reasons of sort of personal prejudice against a certain group of people, for purely ideological reasons. It has to be because we respect evidence and rationality, and we want to govern our policies and organize our lives around evidence-based thinking. Short of that, nothing is going to improve. It's just we're just going to swap out one set of fatuous beliefs anchored in antiquity with fatuous beliefs that are sort of newfangled and homegrown. I don't see that as a better world.
Well said.
Shall we move on to the next point? I hope I can do this. 1 second. There we go. I hope everyone can see what is now point 4. Yeah.
Yeah, so whatever goals we do have for making the world a better place require cooperation with the religious. And they make some interesting points here. Gay rights were not an atheist victory. Civil rights were not an atheist victory. Women's suffrage was not an atheist victory. Gender and sexuality equality will not be an atheist victory. We simply lack the numbers to cause meaningful change, and it's much more pragmatic to work alongside the religious whose values we share than it is to deconvert the majority of our nation. I thought that was an interesting point, but one that made me squirm a little bit. I'm wondering if you guys have the same reaction.
Yeah, well, I do. It makes me uneasy.
Go on, Elsie.
Well, it makes me uneasy to when you talk about cooperation, because that really does sound a little too accommodationist. So, I mean, I think in sort of when it comes to issues of social justice, which are the kinds of examples that they listed there, you know, equality for between the genders, sexual orientation, getting rid of racism, getting rid of slavery, things like that. I mean, you know, we can't credit the ridding ourselves of these social evils. We can't credit that. We can't lay that at the doorstep of atheism. I think that those are largely byproducts of the Enlightenment, so I think sort of a secularizing tendency can take some of that credit, but not all of it. But there's a real worry when you talk about cooperating, because in order to cooperate, you really cannot be too critical of certain things. People simply will not cooperate with people that are too harsh. So I think that these kinds of causes require a certain amount of accommodation, but it really does make me a little uneasy. And I think that part of the reason is that there are certain causes of social justice that where you simply cannot agree on the reasons why you want to bring about a certain social end. And if a person's theology is such that they have very different ends, it's never going to work. I mean, just consider a slightly different example. I mean, there's a group of people who really are lobbying to support Israel. Well, there might be all kinds of reasons why a person might want to support Israel. You might have secular values and reasons why you think we need to support Israel or something like that. But then there are religious people who want to support Israel. There are Christian evangelicals who want to support Israel because they want to bring about the end of the world and have it end in a sacred genocide. You know, and these are the kinds of strange bedfellows that make me very, very uncomfortable. So I'm actually a little uneasy about that one, although I agree with it in principle.
This is probably the one on the list that I'm the most kind of energized about. And it's interesting because I think not even too many months ago I would have said, well, there really isn't really a lot of room for cooperation. You know, I mean, how do atheists and theists, you know, where the labels themselves highlight this sort of oil and water type incompatible underlying understanding of the universe? I mean, what kind of cooperation is there? But I think when we look at the greatest dangers and the folly of these religious enterprises that you know that really cause harm in society, there's an attitude of you need to think like me, you need to share the same fundamental core beliefs as I do, or you know, it's us versus them. And if you I mean, just very organically, without constitutionalizing things. Look at how things kind of have evolved here in the YouTube, Google Plus community, which we always refer to this, atheists versus Christians, atheists versus theists, and yet you look at how things sorted. I was saying a while ago that you could take all the names, you could put Aussie on a little key tag, and you could put G-Man on another one, and you could write everybody's name that's sort of the people who speak in these hangouts and put these little key tags on there, then sort them sort of who gets along with who. Well, Fiona Robertson is somebody, she's a Catholic, she's been speaking a lot about her faith lately. She is not somebody who would be an atheist in any sense. And yet she doesn't really get into squabbles with atheists. She speaks her mind when an atheist does something that she thinks is unpalatable and not, she's pretty vocal about that stuff. But she's also probably someone who is the most sort of, I want to say hated. I'm going to say hated by the evangelical fundamentalists on here. So basically, if you were to take these keychains and kind of sort them out, you would see you've got sort of what I would like to call the reasonable people, atheists and Christians, deists, sort of just people with these very sort of fundamental beliefs. And on the other side of the line, you've got religious radicals. You've got fundamentalist, extremist evangelicals. And that's just without constitutionalizing. That's sort of organically how it's played out here on YouTube. And I think that if when you look at how parties can work together to bring about social change that's positive, that's the kind of thing you see. You'll say, like, who can we work with? Well, obviously, I can't really see, atheists working strongly with the papacy to try to make some sort of change around the world. But at the community level, there's an increasing social movement that's like, you believe how you want to believe. But once you think that a legitimate belief that for you to hold is that you should be allowed to not hire gay people, or you should be able to make dictates in the workplace about birth control strategies in families' homes, then I'm sorry, that's you're on the wrong side of that line. But I think that when atheists start thinking that the only people who can participate with us in establishing positive social change are those people who are motivated by the same fundamental understanding of the universe, I think we slip dangerously close to the religious extremists, like these fundamentalist evangelicals, that will say, oh, well, we're Christians, but those guys aren't real Christians, and those guys aren't real Christians, and you guys are atheists, so you're disgusting people. Right? And it's something I'm wary of. I do think that there are ways that we can cooperate with people, but the banner of cooperation has to be that people are welcome to their own view of how the world works, but the goals, it isn't about spreading your message about how the world is supposed to work. The goals need to be about how we're going to establish a productive and healthy society.
I think about Ken Miller. Ken Miller is a religious person and one of the most, potent forces against creationism. Any sort of religious model that, any activity around creationism has to include the fact that someone like Ken Ham represents only a very small fraction of Christian religious people. His views are not representative of the Christian faith. And I think anyone who would argue that Ken Miller shouldn't be participating in something sponsored by the NCSE, or Francis Collins, who is a fundamentalist, something of a biblical literalist, but not when it comes to matters that really concern me, that I'm willing to compromise as long as we are speaking at an event that is against creationism. I would be happy to lend my voice to his, or to Ken Miller's, or to any of the other people that the NCSE has brought in. They have a clergy project where they're trying to make sure that the American people recognize that the voices of these creationists do not represent good theology as well as representing good science. So in that sense, I agree, because I do support the NCSE's Big Ten approach, but it still makes me queasy to say it the way that it is written, because I don't like the idea of having to compromise or, say, wedge in a religious message into a scientific presentation. I don't want it to be an opportunity for, I don't want there to be confusion about what we're standing for and what we're supporting. There's an old saying, if you mix apple pie and cow pie together, neither one of them tastes any better. Right? So are we mixing pies here together is what really concerns me. So I'm torn on this because I agree with it in the specifics, but I disagree with it, or it makes me queasy in the general.
Well, yeah, I can think of an example. Oh, sorry, Hawkeye, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, you got an example. Go, yeah.
Yeah, the thing that springs to mind is this this statement by I think it was the National Academy of Science, that with a view to sort of with a view to sort of disenfranchising fundamentalist creationist views, they have taken on board, I think, a weird picture about the domain of science and the domain of religion, something along the lines of Stephen Jay Gould's non-overlapping magisteria, that there are these two domains of inquiry. There's the scientific empirical domain, and then there's the domain that properly belongs to religion, values and morality, and never the twain shall meet, and stuff like that. And in a bid to sort of get along and sort of get the religious people sort of on board and express the idea that science poses no threat to religion, and we can all sort of work together to sort of make sure that people don't take young Earth creationists seriously. They've made this a bit of a deal with the devil that I think that long term actually works against the values of secularism and and works against the recognition that religion intrudes into the domain of science all over the place, and it carves off a domain of inquiry, namely values and morality, and says this is the proper province of the religious, and sciences have nothing to say about this. And this, I think, is was a terrible, disastrous mistake, and I don't know how we're going to back out of that, because this idea is now very much out there. And if you get secular-minded people to sort of swallow this stupidity, as I see it, then it's very hard to get people to sort of cough it up once it's been sort of sedimented in there in the culture. So this is the kind of worry that I have about this talk of cooperation. It's that when you start cooperating with some people, you bring on board their idioms and their ways of talking about something, and sometimes the pie gets carved up in a weird way, as I think has happened in that case. That's the kind of example that agitates me.
Yeah, they try to replace creationism with theistic evolution, which has its own baggage, right? Which has its own. I mean, it's a wonderful compromise position to inoculate people against creationism, but I'm not entirely happy about it either. I feel like it's a tie, some good and some bad. Shall we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, I think we should, because people are actually queuing up to join us in the conversation, which I think is a great thing. And just to remind people who may not be aware, if you want to join us to discuss any of the issues that we're talking about, simply send a Skype contact request to magicsandwichshow, all one word, on Skype. Do include, if you could, the gist of the topic or conversation that you would like to join, and we'll see if we can get you on. I've got a couple of people lined up already. I think we're on to point 6, yeah?
I think it's still 5.
Okay.
Religion is not a monolith. That is, there's not one Christianity, there's not one true Christianity, there's not one Islam, there's not one true Islam, and that when atheists use the No True Scotsman card, it's unfair. It's bad practice. It's perhaps bad logic or reason. I'm not sure I quite follow what they're getting at here, and I'm hoping someone can shed a little light on it.
Well, again, Concordance, if I may, could I invite you to actually read out in the exact words or the gist of it, because
I think I just did.
On the screen. Okay.
For better or worse, religions are larger than their foundational texts. They're individual and social phenomena lived and expressed and transmitted and transformed through diverse human beings and diverse human communities. And I'll stop there because I think I've already summarized the rest of it. But they're saying you can't treat Islam as one Islam. You have to treat it as the personal experience of Islam. And I don't agree as I interpret it. I'm hoping someone can interpret it a little bit.
Well, if someone is prepared to attempt to interpret that, then do so. But this is a topic I can assure you I've got a couple of callers lined up to deal with. So unless anyone wants to address this issue now, let's move on to point 6. Does anyone want to address it now?
I'm content to wait on that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to point 6. Let me try and scroll down a little bit. There we go. That should be.
And this is the weakest of them by far.
Okay.
They say that it's not possible to really say that religious belief causes anything in the sense that we can never really say that Islam causes terrorism or violence or oppression of women. That is not a that is not a relationship that we can really demonstrate with any kind of rigor, because it's just not possible. There's no psychological or sociological data that links cause A to effect B in any kind of meaningful or rigorous way. And that we should stop saying that Islam causes violence or subjugation of women or whatever that may be. I think that's completely wrong, and I think it belies everything that we do know about sociology and psychology. We can talk about the influence of the society and the environment on the person, and point to specific sociological components of religion and say, yes, clearly this is shaping how they see the world.
I think in general people...
I'm terribly sorry, Hokutai, you go first. My first caller on this issue. But you, please, Hokutai.
This is a really tough one. Yeah, no problem. As soon as you put the word cause into a sentence, this is going to be a problem because people have trouble discussing what is meant by something causing something, right? And if you just think back to any of the examples about, well, is this behavior, is it nature versus nurture? People always want to partition it into, well, you're born with this trait or you learn this trait. And no, so like just as an example with the religious one a little closer to home is the idea, does religious, evangelical Christianity, does it cause bigotry against gay people? Does it cause homophobia, whether people like that word or not? And it seems like a real chicken and the egg problem, because do people who already dislike gay people, are they more attracted to evangelical fundamentalism because that sort of gives them shelter, or is once you're in evangelical fundamentalism, you certainly can't be pro-gay because they just turn their backs on you and call you a heretic and whatnot, and people sort of want to divide it and say, well, it's either this or it's that, and yet, I mean, this is not a new problem in psychology or sociology, for example, that you can look at partial influence of things. So you may have a community where there's some amount of bias or bigotry against gay people, and you find more of that bias and bigotry amongst the religious people. I mean, these are things that can be studied. I agree with Concordance here that one is a little problematic to say that, well, you can't really say that religion causes something, because we can partial out and observe and like I say, reliably observe and quantify how much religious texts and religious teaching and religious belief causes beliefs in other domains of thinking.
Yeah, I'd put it a little stronger. I mean, there are beliefs, there are actions that people undertake that they simply never would undertake, but for the fact that they believe.
You muted yourself, Ozzy.
Someone, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'd put it a little bit more strongly. There are beliefs are operative. Beliefs are what dictate our conduct, and the easiest way to see that is to sort of keep in mind that there are people doing things in the world, like going around killing witches, for instance, in some parts of Africa, who would not be doing that except that they believe that there are witches. Right? I mean, you have to sort of take on board a whole lot of nonsense, and a worry here is that you can define a belief. You can define something like Christianity or Islam so broadly that it includes so many people with so many diverse beliefs that then you can't say, well, look, you can't say that Islam leads to people beheading people because look, here are some Muslims over here and they're not beheading anybody, right? Well, that's true as far as it goes. But when we say that beliefs cause people, okay, we don't mean some super umbrella. Okay, I mean, theism is an umbrella term, right? There's many kinds of theism. You can even lump deism under it. But you have all of the Abrahamic religions, and you have various polytheistic religions. You can't say theism causes problems because theism that doesn't no behavior is predicable of theism. You know, someone thinking there's a God doesn't translate into any action. But once you decide that you're going to sort of organize your life around an Iron Age text that you think was delivered by the creator of the universe, and that this is a set of marching instructions, and that you have to organize your life around this on pain of eternal suffering and torment. Okay, now you've got a raft of beliefs. Okay, and now it becomes very easy to predict what a person is likely to do and not do. So. And it's the same thing when people talk about atheism and they say, oh, look what happened under Stalin, under Pol Pot, and under these various regimes. Listen, it isn't the fact that people didn't believe there was a God that occasioned these atrocities. You have to believe an awful lot about capitalism and communism, and you have to have an irrational faith in trying to bring about a socialist future, and the number of things that you have to take on board and believe to animate you to specific actions is very vast, and large umbrella terms don't help us. You have to look at the specific beliefs. But yes, specific beliefs absolutely do animate us. What else does animate us? I mean, it's very clear that people are animated by what they believe. You wouldn't go to the refrigerator to pour yourself a bowl of cereal if you didn't think there was milk in the fridge. You'd be going to the oven if you thought the milk was in the oven, right? So I mean, it's that simple and that straightforward. But it's the specific beliefs that matter. It's not these larger umbrellas. The larger umbrella terms don't allow you to get any predictive leverage.
Well, at this stage, I think we're possibly going to segue into the second topic, but I want to maintain it so far as I can on the first. We've got another 4 points to go through, but I want to bring in Fred on this point. Fred, are you with us?
Hi guys. No. I'm not going to encroach on the second topic. I'll stay on topic here, because between concordance and what Ozzy said, I could actually shut up. But I just want to make a very practical example, because we have what, 1 billion or 1.5 billion Muslims. That means we have 1 billion or 1.5 billion versions of Islam, and it's not what Islam tells people. It's what the people understand Islam to be, what they allow it to be. Now, Islam is a whole spectrum of things. It can be anything that you want it to be. It can be the most, the most peaceful and the most violent, but it depends on the people, what they make of it. Now, what I see as a direct effect is, for example, that over 50% of Muslims are illiterate. Now, how is that possible in the 21st century? And this is based on data. This is not just, let's make an assumption or something. They actually go and they measure people. They have the literacy project and things like that, who go out into the countries like Bangladesh or like Nigeria and so on, and actually go and teach the people how to read and write. So this is what the numbers are based on. How is that possible? Well, in Islam, if you read the Quran, it says, you do not need to have any knowledge. You need to think, you need to reflect, you need to ponder, you need to understand only 2 things, and that is Quran and God. Once you take Quran and God, you're done. That's all you need for your life. You don't need to learn to read if somebody tells you what it says. You don't need to learn arithmetic or any of this Western bullshit like what Boko Haram is doing. They're saying we don't need this Western, any kind of education that comes from the West. We just simply don't need it, because all we need is our God. And now what this leads to, and this is quite sick, because there's a Muslim apologist who makes like a video a week. And he now came up with this thing, and they love. I mean, there's people like LDM, and he calls himself Dawa Man. He's like a hip hop guy, and he raps and he makes out all cool and that. But he's a total idiot. He came out with this idea that atheists should drink their father's sperm because they have no values, they have no any kind of ability to distinguish between good and bad, so they might as well do something stupid like that. And this is a direct influence of what Islam teaches these people, that they are superior, that they are way above the rest of the world, and the worst are the atheists now because they are destroying their lovely beliefs. And this is where I see that there is a direct cause between Islam and what people are then prepared to take on board. And if they do, this is the outcome, that you have 50% illiterates and really uneducated people. I mean, Muslims have one single scientific Nobel Prize in the last, 100 and odd years, between the 1,000 people who've received the Nobel Prize. One single scientific Nobel Prize for a Muslim. And that's the level that it is.
I don't know whether that... this obviously deals with the second issue that we want to address on the program. I'm not sure whether that is a direct comment on the topic 6 that we had. I want you to stick with us, though, please.
I'd like to comment on this, DPR, when you get
yeah, sure.
It seems to me that anything that rises to the level of overriding our inner sense of morality, anything that comes from the outside and tells us what is good or evil, is something to be questioned and held to a higher standard. If we all lived according to, Harry Potter, right, and we read Harry Potter every day, and we took from it our moral sense, and part of that moral sense was to identify anyone who, spoke like a snake and hang them up, then I would say that unquestionably Harry Potter is being used for evil. I wouldn't say Harry Potter is evil. I would say that the application of Harry Potter is something to be hated, even if only 20% of the people reading Harry Potter actually went out and did these things that overrode what we would call the moral sense that they have, the zeitgeist level of moral sense. So I think there is something distinctive and special about scriptural truth that has in and of itself something harmful, something malicious. And that's why I'm not prepared to excuse this sort of personalized experience of Islam or Christianity or animism or Buddhism if it overrides what I see as basic moral character. If it's telling people to do bad things, it's a bad thing for them. That's it.
Sure. I'm just looking at some stuff. I think our caller identifies an issue that I now find very alarming, and I'll grant that I've only had a moment to sort of look through some of this material. And just again, reminding people that we're on point number 6 here, which is it isn't clear how much religious belief causes anything. Well, can we sort of work from start with a working assumption here that when it comes to education, education tends to be a link in a lot of chains. So that if there is a social structure or belief system or something that encourages education and new research and just not just having like Nobel Prize winners amongst a group of people, but bringing up the overall level, bringing up the base level of education, then those people are in general they're going to make better choices. Now that's an assumption. I'm just offering that up as a working assumption. Because on the other hand, if you've got one that discourages education, that doesn't want to lift that base, then there's a bunch of other things that come with it that are undesirable. It's not simply that people aren't educated, but with that comes these other problems, like teenage pregnancy, repeat teenage pregnancy, people not wanting to get vaccinated, diseases. Violence, neighborhoods, just all these different things that would be associated with a lack of education. And I think that because the Magic Sandwich Show often kind of interacts with fundamentalist Christians, we tend to kind of show some alarm over how there's this sort of anti-science, anti-education thing that's going on in the U.S. where you don't want your kids to go to college and meet a Kevin Sorbo type professor that's just going to make you, whatever. But looking at this, caller saying is what, half the people half the Muslims are illiterate. I mean, the rates are frightening. And it's not just in the Islamic countries. It's also when you look at like the UK is looking into this, India is looking into this. It just seems like even cultures where you've got, other countries where you've got Muslims who've been there for a generation or two generations, they tend to have the highest illiteracy and the highest rates of, for example, getting to an age where you should be employed and simply having no job skills. And so I think that if it's the case, there's something that goes on culturally or theologically that discourages radical Christians or even mainstream Muslims from getting educated. I think that in itself is incredibly alarming.
Can I mention a stat, and this is very relevant to what we will be talking about next, and we've got this video clip of Bill Maher having his discussion with Batman and Sam Harris, and that is the percentage of Egyptians and these are Muslims in Egypt and Pakistan. It's about 64% of them support the death penalty for apostasy, for leaving Islam. 64%. Now that is a pretty high number of people who don't think you should be allowed not to believe once you believe. And why do they believe that? Did they come to that decision on their own? Is that something that perhaps they were gazing off into the distance and thought, yeah, I think really we need the death penalty for anyone who leaves my religion? No, of course not. It's scriptural, right? It's commanded. It's taught to them at the place where they go quite often in order to receive moral insight. So I think that question alone, the fact that you have, and it's much, much higher in Afghanistan, and it's lower in places like, I'm looking at the study now, Indonesia and Tunisia, it's barely 15 or 20%, right? But still, 15 or 20% of people think that leaving their religion means that you should be put to death. I think that's a horrible thing, and I can't unsee that. I can't unthink that, and I don't think that I'm being judgmental or bigoted when I say that I can't support that. I can't in any way call it personal experience and somehow excuse it. There's something wrong in that.
Ozzy.
Well, just to take off on what Concordance was saying, I mean, I'd go a little further. I mean, that is barbarism. That is a barbaric view. The idea that if you don't believe in this any longer, the just punishment is to kill you is barbarism. I mean, this is something that we saw in the West in Christianity, millennia ago. Thank goodness that's over with. But I mean, there are other parts of the world that are benighted, but to say that is not to suggest that every Muslim thinks this way, and that you have to treat every Muslim as if they thought this way, and that you have to be prejudicial. And it's not to say that is the true Islam. This point 6, I think it was point 6, sort of. What it's recommending is listen, we as non-believers, it's not our place to dictate what is true Islam and what is true Christianity. If someone asks me what's a Christian, I'll just say it's a follower of Jesus, however you define that. And I don't care if you think Jesus was just a man or if you think he was fully divine, if you believe in some fundamental version of Christianity, or if you're a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, I don't care. It's all the same to me. I'm not a follower of Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, however broadly you define it, or narrowly you define it, that's up to you. That's in house. That's up to them. We can criticize Islam where we find Muslims who have pernicious beliefs that are worthy of criticizing them, and we shouldn't be afraid of people saying, "Oh, Islamophobia," or "You're an anti-Christian bigot." And listen, I have plenty of friends who are Christians, and there are plenty of people whose Christianity I think is demented and dangerous, and we will be well rid of it when we manage to get people to see that they are demented and ridiculous and to be abandoned, right? That will be a better world. But there's no bigotry as long as you're talking about bad ideas. But if you try to suggest that all Muslims are like this or all Christians are like this, well then, okay, now you are treading into stereotyping and overgeneralizing and bigotry. But you should never let a person bully you into the suggestion that that's what you're doing simply by virtue of the fact that you're pointing to something being a hotbed of bad ideas. You can point to the hotbed of bad ideas and say, this is a pile of stupidities over here, and I'm going to say that, and there are other people over here who believe some of this, but they don't believe it to the same extent, and they don't believe it for the same reasons, or they don't believe it at all. They believe other things that are superficially related to this, and I don't have to condemn them just because I'm condemning these things. And so there's an anxiety especially we liberals, have about sort of picking on the underdog and being discriminatory and being bigoted, and we have to make sure that we don't fall prey to our own anxieties about being seen as the bad guys. I can't be worried about that.
Okay, but can I just ask you guys, do we engage with stupid? In other words, somebody who really says atheists should drink their father's sperm, should we ignore people like that, or should we engage?
Oh. Well, I have to say at this point, if I may, the rest of this I'd love to talk about, but I want to move on to the second topic, so to speak, and I'm so glad that Fred is here with us. Let me set the ground where I'm coming from is concerned. I was talking to someone, not Fred, I can assure you, but someone else who seems to understand to a great degree what Islam is all about. And I asked them, and this was about a week ago, I asked them, are ISIS, or is ISIS, following Islamic teaching? And well, I've got some reaction there, and they gave me their answer, and I said, well, is it the case that the moderate Muslims, of which there are many, I fully accept that, then they're not following the true Quran or the true teachings of the Quran? And in relation to this, I posited the example, with a Christian, you often, excuse me, you often find that a Christian will say the bad things in the Bible, but they're all Old Testament. Everything changed with the New Testament and the loving, caring Jesus and whatever, blah, blah, blah. We've heard all of these arguments before. The Quran doesn't have that excuse. The only way in which you can sort of like find difference of interpretation in the Quran seems to be through the Hadiths. But, and this is what I want to ask Fred, is it the case that a student of the Quran can do the things that ISIS is doing? Let me put it another way. Is ISIS the pure interpretation of the Quran?
No, that's why I laughed. You can't answer this. Is Rolls-Royce the best car in the world? It's impossible to answer. Islam is multifaceted. Okay, you have so many different levels, so many different areas. You have, I mean, just to understand Islam, you need to first of all understand where it comes from. Do you take the traditional narrative? Do you take the little angel coming to the cave and giving old Muhammad some sentences, and this carries on over 23 years? Do you take the tack, no, we don't really know where the Quran comes from? Or do you say, was Islam the product of the Islamic expansion? So you need to set that as the basis. Now, the second thing is you need to understand that a caliph in Islam can only come directly from the Quraysh, the Meccan tribe. So what Baghdadi has done, he says, yes, I am a direct descendant of the Quraysh. I can trace my lineage all the way back to Muhammad. Now, if you look at all these things together, the Quran itself, I mean, how many times, the Quran has 114 chapters. How many times do you think the Quran says non-believers need to burn in hell? It's 105 times. And the Quran is only 114 chapters. I mean, it's a thin book. But 105 times it says all non-believers need to burn. How do you now go and decide whether the Quran is the basis for what this guy does? It's the same. I mean, was Hitler a Christian? Yes. Was Christianity the reason why you had Nazis? No. So this is a political thing. Islam is a political ideology. Yes, a religion is a component, but it is 80% political. The goal of Islam is to implement Sharia. You want I mean, you have 4 Islamic republics, okay? You have Mauritania, Pakistan, Iran. So this is what they're trying to do. This is the goal of Islam. And of course they're using the Quran, but the Quran is totally vague and ambiguous. So you can't really take the Quran for anything. So you need the Hadith, but the Hadith are like totally vague as well. They contradict each other. They contradict the Quran. So you need, at the end of the day, the individual interpretation. And then you can go and say, okay, this is because there is no such thing as a true Islam. But you can say, in Islam, there is a scholar who says you should do this, and this is permissible. Then you call this the consensus between all the different scholars. Then you can go back and say, well, this is based on the hadiths, which say so and so and so. So this is what Muhammad did, and because Muhammad did it, and because he beheaded people, this is what we need to do now. Then you go to the biographies of Muhammad. So you take the whole Sunnah, the whole hadith, everything together, and then you go to the Quran and say, well, in the Quran it says in 3 different sentences, you are allowed to cut people's necks, you know, cut the heads off. So yes, you can say it's a Quran, but is that the basis? Is that the cause? I maintain no. It is what people want it to be, and they justify it by looking afterwards what it is that they're trying to prove.
Okay, I can see that and I accept that, and I also find it somewhat risible that we're dealing with a situation to a large extent that is a fight between the Shias and the Sunnis.
I didn't even get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, but well, let's get to that point.
Yeah, but that complicates it.
And this is a broader aspect that I'd like other people to comment on as well. But I'll invite you to do it first. You know, what reason does the West have to engage in a conflict which is effectively Sunni and Shia? Why not? And I know this is like a ridiculous question, but hey, let's pose it. Why not leave them to sort it out between themselves? Why do we,
correct,
as the West, need to impose ourselves in this situation?
Yeah, it's playing political games. I mean, you are right. There should. I mean, if Sunnis and Shias want to fight each other, which they have done for the last 1,000 years, why not let them continue with it? The problem is that the U.S. put a Shia government into Iraq, because before the Ba'ath Party with Saddam Hussein was neither. So there was always this tension between Iran and Iraq. I mean, they had a war for almost the entire 80s, for the whole duration. But in actual fact, what you could do now is just let them work it out. But the thing is, it becomes a humanitarian conflict as well, because suddenly the Christians are in the middle of things. Um, how do you react? Do you let everybody just go crazy? Why did we go into Qatar, into Kuwait, when Iraq marched in? It's always a question of what you want to achieve, whether it's political, whether it's economic, or whether it's humanitarian.
Okay.
I would say there's a humanitarian element here, irrespective of what other third parties are involved. I mean, even if you only have two Muslim sects that are really going at it, and everybody else is sort of, a helpless bystander who's going to be swept up and eaten up in this conflict. I mean, you have to look at sort of the general population. In any general population, there's going to be people who belong to one side, one faction, or the other, who are animated to act and essentially go to war for their side. But I mean, the vast majority of the people don't want any of this. They would really just like to sort of go about their business and wish that all of this would go away. However much they may hate or dislike and feel contempt for the people on the other side of this theological divide, there are people who are being just destroyed. I mean, just think of children. I mean, imagine if you're an 8-year-old girl, and you're Sunni, or you grew up in a Shia household, or whichever is the case. This is hardly your fault. And I don't think that the world can just sort of stand by and do nothing. Now, what specifically is our moral obligation is obviously complicated, and I don't know enough to suggest that what specifically we need to do. But I mean, to suggest that we can just sort of sit back and watch and just let it unfold, I mean, that's just a little too cold. You really are just letting people drown, and I don't think we can stand by and do that with clean consciences.
I'll see. I'll take issue with that.
Sure.
In a lot of conflict situations, that's exactly what the Western world does. It sits back with indifference because it has no interest in the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously wrong to sit back and watch people suffering and look upon it with indifference because you don't have a stake in it. I mean, that's obviously wrong. I mean, I don't have a stake in someone, whether they live or die in Africa of starvation when there's a famine, right? But we have a moral duty, we feel, to act and to do what we can, right? And now in the case of people starving, it's a little bit more straightforward what you need to do. But in any conflict where people are being immiserated and people are who are innocent and helpless and trapped in these sorts of situations, I think you can't look to the fact that all too often we do nothing. We can't look at the fact that we all too often do nothing and use that as a justification for, in any specific instance, we should again do nothing. I mean, we should obviously try to do what we can, where we have a reason to think it will work. I mean, I'm not someone who thinks somebody's got to do something, anything. No, we have to have a plan. We have to have a reasonable expectation that it's the right plan and it's a good plan and it will be efficacious. We don't have a moral obligation to run in like fools and just entangle ourselves in something that could potentially make it worse, and even if it doesn't make it worse for them, makes it worse for us. I mean, that would be foolish too. But I think we can't just sort of stand back. I mean, just look at these refugee camps that are developing, and people sort of flooding out of one country and into another country, seeking refuge. It's clear that not all the participants who are affected here are equally motivated by animosity towards the other side of this theological divide and eager to go to war. They're not. They really just want to live their lives. And now people in their millions are on the move, just trying to get the hell out of the way.
I would want to jump in and add something. I think we do actually have an interest in this, and it's not just about oil, but look at the amount of people from the UK, from France, from Spain, etc., who are going to fight with ISIS or al-Nusra. This is definitely something that is happening from within the societies that we're talking about. It's not as if this is happening there's no relation whatsoever between the UK and ISIS, or the UK and Kurdistan, etc. There are a lot of people involved from these countries, and something has to be done. And I'm not sure that bombing right now is the solution, but I don't have a better one yet either.
I would think a Brit would understand the idea of intervening at a timely fashion when someone has obviously got plans for expansion and chaos. I would have thought a lesson had been learned at some point.
Okay, and then what do you do with the people who actually go there to live there? Because there are women who are saying, I want my children to grow up in that country. I want my children to be safe, and that is the safest place on earth.
Which country?
Well, the one that they're trying to establish. Well,
the caliphate. Yeah, the caliphate.
This
yeah.
IS. I try not to grant them the respect of calling it a state or a country. That's why I call them Daesh. The Daesh are the Daesh cutthroats, because it's it's a shorter form. So I try not to call it a country or a state or anything. But there are people who actually actively want to go there because they feel safe.
I actually grant them the title caliphate. That's what they want. That's what millions of people say that they are. So why say that it's not?
Well, you can't have a caliphate without the Ummah. You need the acceptance of the rest of the Muslims, which they are not getting by. I mean, Sheikh Abdul Aziz, the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia. I mean, they're on Hajj at the moment in Mecca. And
right.
he went and said, listen, you guys are not Muslims by a long way, and stop propagating Islam this way.
I agree, and I would say that they truly are the most extreme form that we've ever seen, at least in the modern age. However,
Indonesia, Philippines, they were going crazy there, abducting people and going crazy left, right, and center a couple of decades. Well, it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know if it was this bad though. I mean, they weren't doing mass grave killings at the time. Nothing this bad, I don't think. At least I don't remember. But to your point though, I think that it's once again it's sort of trying to, from an outside perspective, defining who is a Muslim, who is a Christian, etc. I think it's for them to say. Are they Islamic? From everything I can see, they say they are, and they cite chapter and verse, and so to me, yeah, they are. I don't know. I don't consider them a true caliphate anyway, and I don't consider them to be a true country. But that's another matter.
It's another matter, but again, going back to my position, how do I know who is a true Muslim? I mean, it's again, it goes back to who's a true Christian, who's a true Muslim.
Exactly.
Maybe we should play that video. That is the perfect setup for the video.
Yeah.
Let's do that. And you put me in an awkward position.
I'm sorry. Let me set it up.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I'm trying to do it.
This is, I mean, as the title suggests, Bill Maher, Ben Affleck, Sam Harris, and a number of others, including Steele, the Republican National Convention. Is he still the head of that, or he was?
Yeah, Michael Steele. He was the head of the Republican Party, actually.
He's not anymore, though, is he?
No, it's been a long time, actually, since he got kicked out, basically.
Hang on a second. This is not looking good.
But the topic is Islam, and it gets quite heated. If you haven't already seen this video, it's well worth watching. It's not all that productive. I mean, there's a lot of talking over. But I think Sam Harris and Ben Affleck sort of talk past each other. Bill Maher keeps throwing in some real bombs into the discussion, and it's quite interesting to see how it all went. I'll give you a little follow-up. Apparently Sam Harris, and as he put it in Twitter, he and Batman had a meeting in the green room afterwards and sort of sussed it out a little bit so that they had a better dialogue there.
Yeah, I think I've got it now, Concordance.
I can see it.
Yeah, okay, if I press...
Let's see if we get audio. No audio so far.
No.
Okay, that's fine.
How recent is this?
I think it was just a few days ago.
Okay, have we got this? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
We hear you, yeah.
Okay. Hopefully that means you can also see this screen share.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead, Grandpa.
I have a case, I think, I have anyway, that liberals need to stand up for liberal principles. This is what I said on.
Can you hear that?
Obviously,
Very
It's a little,
faint.
little
It's a little
soft.
soft.
Turn it up.
freedom of speech, freedom to practice any religion you want without fear of violence, freedom to leave a religion, equality for women,
Is that better?
equality for
Yeah.
A lot
men,
better.
homosexuals. These are liberal principles that liberals applaud for, but then when you say in the Muslim world this is what's lacking, then they get upset.
Yeah. Well, liberals have really failed on the topic of theocracy. They'll criticize white theocracy. They'll criticize Christians. They'll still get agitated over the abortion clinic bombing that happened in 1984. But when you want to talk about the treatment of women and homosexuals and free thinkers and public intellectuals in the Muslim world, I would argue that liberals have failed us. And the crucial point of confusion, yes, thank you.
Thank God you're here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the crucial point of confusion is that we have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
That is it's intellectually ridiculous. It gets
So hold on, are you the person who understands the officially codified doctrine of Islam? You're the interpreter of that, so you can say, well, this is...
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
I'm asking you. So you're saying, if I criticize that, you're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing. That if you're critical of something...
Well, it's not a real thing when we do it.
Right.
Well, no,
It really is.
I'm not denying that certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people. And that's a problem.
Big.
But
But why are you so hostile about this?
It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so not.
It's like saying the stateless shifty Jew.
You're not listening
Absolutely
to
not.
what we are saying.
You guys are saying if you want to be liberals, believe in liberal principles,
Right.
like freedom of speech, like
Right.
we are endowed by our forefathers with an inalienable rights, like all men are created.
No.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
Of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to
Okay,
criticize bad
but
ideas.
why
is the mother lode of bad ideas?
Jesus.
So we have
That's
ideas
just a
like
fact.
blasphemy.
No, it's an ugly
Apostasy.
It is
basic liberal
Let me
principle of
unpack it.
tolerance.
Let me unpack
But
it.
not for
No,
intolerance.
of course not. But the picture you're painting is to some extent true, but it's hugely incomplete. It is certainly true that plenty of fanatics and jihadis are Muslim, but the people who are standing up to them, Malala, Muhammad Ali Dadak in Iran, in prison for 9 years for speaking up for Christians. A friend that I had in Pakistan who was shot this year, Rashid Rahman, for defending people accused of apostasy.
Or how about the more than 1 billion people
those
who
are
are
Muslims.
fanatical, who don't punish women, who just want to go to school?
Wait a second.
Sandwiches,
Wait a
break
second.
breakfast, they
Wait a
don't do
second.
any of the things you're saying. All Muslims.
Wait a second.
Wait a
second.
things, and you're painting the whole group religion with that.
Let's get down to who has the right answer here. 1 billion people, you say. All these billion people don't hold any of these. Don't hold these pernicious beliefs. No, I wouldn't. Well, that's just not true, Ben. That's just not true.
Can I just express how I think it breaks down?
The idea, you haven't been. You're trying to say that these few people. That's all the problem is. These few bad apples. The idea that someone should be killed if they leave the
That's
Islamic.
horrible. That should
Wait. You're
true
saying that
in a
the
fair way.
idea that someone should be killed if they leave the Islamic religion is just a few bad apples?
the people who would actually believe in an act that you murder somebody if they have
Yes.
Islam is not the majority of Muslims at all.
Okay, let me break this down for you. Okay, we have,
It's
as you say, we have 1.5, 1.6 billion Muslims. Now,
second biggest religion in the world, a quarter.
Well,
Ben, let me unpack this. Let me unpack this for you.
Please do.
We have just imagine some concentric circles here. You have at the center, you have jihadists. These are people who wake up in the morning wanting to kill apostates, wanting to die trying. They believe in paradise. They
Horrible, bad
believe
people.
in martyrdom. Outside of them, we have Islamists. These are people who are just as convinced of martyrdom and paradise and wanting to foist their religion on the rest of humanity, but they want to work within the system. They're not going to blow themselves up on a bus. They want to change governments. They want to use democracy against itself. Those two circles arguably are 20% of the Muslim world. Okay, this is not.
What are you basing that research on?
A bunch of poll results that we can talk about. So to give you one point of contact, 78% of British Muslims think that the Danish cartoonist should have been prosecuted. 78%. So I'm being conservative when I roll this back to 20%. But outside of that circle, you have conservative Muslims who can honestly look at ISIS and say that does not represent us. We're horrified by that. But they hold views about human rights and about women, about homosexuals that are deeply troubling. So these are not Islamists, they're not jihadists, but they believe
those views are
divine. But they also keep women and homosexuals immiserated in these cultures, and we have to empower the true reformers in the Muslim world to change it. And lying about the link between doctrine and behavior is not going to do that.
The Great Divide. The Great Divide is not between Islam and the rest. It's rather between the fundamentalists and the moderates in each faith.
But we're misled to think that the fundamentalists are the fringe. Okay, we have jihadists, Islamists, and conservatives.
And by the way,
this depends on hundreds of millions of people.
You're saying that the strongest voices are coming from those who are jihadists and extremists, and that represents a bigger piece of the pie than we often think is true.
There's no question.
Okay, so having said that, and even if that is true statistically or otherwise, the key thing to recognize that I don't think is part of the argument, but I think should be, is that there are voices that are oftentimes raised in opposition to these jihadists and to these extreme acts. But guess what? They don't get covered. They don't get exposed. And they're not given the same level of platform that we see the jihadists.
One reason they don't get exposed is because they're afraid to speak out. Because it's the only religion that acts like the mafia that will fucking kill you if you say the wrong thing, draw the wrong picture, or write the wrong book. So you do have, there's a reason why Ayaan Hirsi Ali needs bodyguards 24/7.
You do have that element of fear as well, but you also have other braver souls out there who do speak out and who who
are risking their lives.
Like the Muslim clerics and others from Australia to Europe to the United States just recently publicly put their names on paper declaring their opposition.
Well, that was expected.
What am I doing here? Just listen to Sam Harris. He says it exactly right.
Absolutely true.
And I've got some statistics here, guys, to back up what Sam Harris was saying. There was a Pew poll. And this is just meant to be representative of the kinds of things he's talking about. When they poll people in various Islamic countries, Islamic majority, and remember, they don't just poll Muslims. They poll everyone in the country, a representative sampling. When they asked whether or not laws should strictly follow the Quran, that they should be influenced or inspired by the Quran, or whether the Quran should have little or no role in the writing of laws. In Pakistan, you've got 82% of people feel that their laws should very strictly follow the Quran. 72% in Jordan. Pakistan, 0% of people polled said that laws shouldn't be influenced by the Quran. They want a theocracy. That's how they're expressing their viewpoints. Now it differs. I mean, in places like Turkey and Lebanon, only 17% said that they wanted a Quranic basis for their laws. Now those are not 100% Muslim countries. They're Christian minorities in both, and they are very pluralist societies. But I think it's worth saying that there are sort of these concentric circles of how strongly they feel that secularism is their enemy. And that's really how I interpret some of these kinds of data points. I don't know if you guys see it the same way.
Well, I'm going to throw out a bomb here, but please don't take this as a direct comparison. I make this caveat right now. The excuse that there are a billion Muslims who are not doing these things falls on deaf ears to me. Look, you can just look at what happened in Germany in the 1940s and in the 1930s. Nazism, most people were Nazis, but did not actually go out and actively kill Jews or anybody else, actually. And even those people in the military, it wasn't the whole lot of them that were machine gunning, civilians to death or gassing them to death. It doesn't mean that Nazism as an ideology was could be a peaceful or good idea. It just means that most people were not involved in these activities, or did not take them as seriously as others, or because to do some of these crimes, you actually had to volunteer for some of these units. So these were the most fanatical followers. So to me, it doesn't matter if a billion people are not actively engaging in these things. It bespeaks nothing of the value of Islam as a quote-unquote peaceful religion. And again, I judge all religions, not just Islam. But since we are talking about Islam and ISIS, and since I do happen to live in the area, then I have something to say about it. I don't view Islam as a peaceful religion in any way whatsoever, regardless of whether most of its followers are right now happen to be at war or not. I think that the ideology itself is clearly an ideology in the later years based upon warring ideas when Muhammad's peaceful verses did not really have that much effect.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you think that your beliefs are peaceful? Your ideology is peaceful?
My ideology doesn't include damning people to eternal torture and exterminating entire peoples because they don't believe the way I do. I would never advocate for the genocide of anyone.
That doesn't actually answer my question. Do you think it's peaceful?
I really don't. I mean, it depends on the situation, I suppose. But again, I don't advocate going out there and unnecessarily killing people just because they don't believe that the way I do. It depends on their actions. I don't think that people are eternally doomed for not believing the way I do. I don't think that people are cursed by bloodline because they don't share my ideology. Or because they happen to be of another religion. I just think that is if my religion's not peaceful, then theirs quintessentially is not peaceful.
This is what I'm asking.
I don't have a religion. I'm an atheist, as you know.
Okay. Okay. What do you think?
So you are not a Muslim?
No, I live in Israel and I'm an atheist. I'm an out-and-out atheist. Yeah.
Because when I'm on a crusade at the moment, okay, what I'm doing is I'm asking every single Muslim that I in any way interact with, I ask them, do you personally condemn categorically Muslims who stone a woman to death? And let me tell you, I am flabbergasted how many Muslims there are who will not commit to this, who will find some way of justifying it.
There is a very, very little recognized channel on YouTube, but I think he really should get far more recognition than he does. He's been doing this for about a year or so. His name is Corey Gil Shuster, and he's an American. He lives in Israel, but he goes around asking questions to Israeli Jews and to Palestinians, direct questions, even in the territories, questions which, frankly, in some places in the territories might actually get him in a lot of trouble. But he does it absolutely fearlessly. And he puts these answers up, uncut, unedited, really. I mean, you get the full answer typically, sometimes 5 or 6 minutes long. 2 questions submitted by users. It's very interesting to see the disparity between the two. And by the way, he doesn't edited in favor of Israeli society. I mean, he'll put up Israeli extremists just as much as Palestinian extremists, which I really appreciate. And he's actually against the territorial settlements, which I am as well.
Can you put his name in the chat?
Yeah. He's a really interesting guy, young guy, Corey Gill Shuster. I think there might be a dash between Gill and Shuster or something. But anyway, look him up. Really interesting guy. And you can submit your own questions for him to ask, and he will go around asking them on video, and really fascinating answers. And, of course, depends where he goes, what kind of answers he gets from what kind of people. But you really see the differences sometimes, or sometimes the similarities. I mean, it is absolutely wonderful journalism reporting at its core, in a sense. And I think this guy really should get a lot more recognition than he does. But he will ask questions. I mean, he will go around asking questions that, frankly, I probably wouldn't ask in the territories myself, but he seems to be fine with it. So I would definitely check him out. Maybe communicate with him. He's very responsive, and you can send in your own questions. I figure that might be of interest to you.
And while we're providing these random endorsements for YouTube channels, I think that's a good idea. If you can find the link, it'd be good if you could post it in not just in the local chat here, but in the comments. And we can take a look at it. DPR might be minded to include it in the video description. Plus, I've been meaning to ask, and I don't want to say our first caller. I don't want to say the name that's displayed here, because sometimes people's personal names that they don't want released gets displayed in the Google Hangout. Are you the owner of Stop Spamming One, all one word? Stop Spamming One.
Oh. Is this for me? Okay, no, you can say Fred.
Yeah.
I'm not Fred. This is.
You're not Fred. Okay.
No. This
like Fred.
Remember, there
but you
was
also don't look like a white Will Smith either. So.
Exactly. Well, Google came up with this idea that they need to take over. Then I had to come up with a name, and I don't know why I came up with Fred. I thought this was. I'm not Fred. Don't worry about it.
Okay, well, we can call you Fred. We can call you whatever you'd like to call it. We just typically we don't want to say the name that's displayed, because sometimes it trips people up.
I understand.
But are you?
Yes,
sorry?
but I am Stop Spamming One. Yes.
You are Stop Spamming One. Yeah, it's a channel that it's great content on it. Should
thank you.
Get busy, put some more up there. We're we spend a lot of time in this corner of YouTube discussing the culture war that goes on in the United States, which means that Christianity gets a big spotlight. Arguably not Christianity, but evangelicalism. A big spotlight, perhaps more than even due, whereas a lot of the material on Stop Spamming One is, I think, really insightful look at what's going on around the world with regard to Islam. So I'd be, and I'll ask DPR about this, I'd be minded to actually put a link to your channel in the video description too. Some interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, I put the description to Corey's channel in the chat there. You can check it out when you have time.
Thank you.
But I mean, back to the subject of what constitutes ISIS as being Muslim or non-Muslim. I think that they are. They just happen to be fanatical about the most, some of the most fanatical about their religious decrees. That's all. So I really, when people go around saying they're not Muslim, I think that's a bit silly. It's like saying that the Phelps family aren't Christian. Well, they are. And in fact, nobody really says that they're not Christian. People say they're extremists, they're crazy, etc. But
well, actually, I'll
fact that these people are Christian, but yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
nobody.
There was a lag. Yeah.
All three of us have lag now. Please go.
Yeah, plenty of Christians will insist that the Westboro Baptist Church are not real Christians and pull that no true Scotsman fallacy. I mean, we just heard Hogtie a moment ago say Christian and immediately correct himself and say, no, I mean evangelical Christians or fundamentalist Christians, or right. But that's what we need to do, though, right? I mean, we need to guard against the allegation that we're lumping everyone together by making the distinctions that need to be made. And you can talk about, you know, these kill crazy fundamentalists within Islam, and you know, call them as you see them, and but if you just say Muslims or Islam, well, then of course now it does sound like you're adjudicating on what real Islam is, and now you lay yourself sort of open to the allegation of someone like Ben Affleck, who wants to come out and say, oh, Sam Harris, you're the person who's going to tell us what real Islam is. And the answer is no. I leave it to the people who self-identify as Muslims, whether or not they want to call them. They should be called Muslims.
Sorry, I want to challenge you a little bit on this, based on, I think, where Sam Harris went, which was sort of this polling data, and what it shows that the average, if you like, Muslim beliefs. And of course, it depends on the country, and we are talking about, you know, a heterotypic group, a group with, you know, many camps within it. And this is back to the point of, you know, we shouldn't treat religion as monolithic. But I think it's very suggestive that you've got such a large number of people in predominantly Muslim countries that want Quranic law. And further polling data, and I'm going down the list here, shows that they generally don't see women, they don't see treating women equally as a priority. And the real point, the whole topic was launched off on Bill Maher's show, was really that liberals have failed to identify the threat of Islam. And the threat of Islam is whatever their personal experience of Islam may be, whatever diverse and you know, different interpretation they have, it is producing an effect which is contrary to the secular values that we cherish. That is, I think, a direct threat to the values that we cherish. And these are not just a problem of extremists or some, you know, 1% in one small country. We're talking about 80% of people in an entire country want to make sure that it's a Quranic law. And when we poll people on their belief that there should be a universal caliphate, that is something that is held by a very large proportion of the people in the US and Britain who identify as Muslim. When we look at equality for women, that is a value that we feel women have rights. Women should be treated equally. Regardless of the religious culture that they grow up in, they should have rights. And I think that somehow giving Islam a pass for being so opposed to these shared secular global perspectives on civil rights, human rights, is wrong, and it is a failure of the liberal perspective in the U.S. and the UK and in Europe in general that we're not more critical of these views.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is a problem with liberalism, and I understand, as a liberal, I understand where it comes from. I feel the squirming, the inner squirming from other liberals when these topics come up, because they don't want to sound racist, because they think that judging Islam is racist. They don't want to sound like they're colonialist. They don't want to sound superior, as in one culture is superior to another. I understand the history of this. It's clear where this comes from because of what happened in the 20th century, because of what happened with colonialism and our history with slavery and racism, etc. But it doesn't mean that you can't make certain judgments about certain things around you, regardless of people's skin color or religion or creed or what have you. You can still make judgments based on rational assessments, regardless, and you can do so. You should be able to do so without being labeled as a racist. And I think that the problem is that the term racist has been thrown around so often, and now Islamophobia. that it's really put a damper on the entire conversation, and that's really where you get this. I would not only say fear, but actual brainwashing into thinking that yes, somehow indigenous populations of other color are, somehow more peaceful than us, and it's our imperialism that causes all this problems. It's not, and the world has always been this way. It's always been one side fighting another in various conflicts, and people just have to accept that. And accept that we can still make rational judgments based on rationality.
And that's exactly where Affleck went. I found that was what really set off the video for me. Is that was the exact response. The response that I think Sam Harris was criticizing was the exact response he got from Ben Affleck. Was this sort of knee-jerk reaction to any kind of the mildest of criticism of basic violations of human rights, and he was willing to overlook that. He was ready to jump to the defense of a system that is obviously harmful to some people.
Well, I always like to use an example. A lot of people keep referring to the abortion clinic bombings of the 1990s, and they were horrific. I remember them very well. But I have yet to find a liberal who, when that does happen, when a clinic is bombed or when you have persecution of homosexuals or what have you, somebody on the liberal side who would actually state something of the effect of, well, these are poor people from oppressed areas such as Alabama where they have very little education and there are political reasons for this. Does it ever happen? Have you ever heard this when it comes to Christian violence? Now, I'm an atheist. I think this is just as bad in a sense, but I have never heard that kind of equivocating on Christian violence as I have with Islamic violence. And that is really the core issue I think that Sam Harris is trying to address.
There's another variable in here that that should be mentioned. First of all, Nathaniel, I agree completely with your characterization of the motivations of we liberals here. A fear of colonialism and of posturing as if we're superior to other people, and which is in itself condescending, actually.
Right.
But there's another variable here, and that is, I'm sorry.
What? We're not.
But there's another variable, and that is that here in the West, where we're dealing with sort of problems of fundamentalist Christianity and its incursions into education and things like that. And women's reproductive rights and that sort of thing, and homosexuality. We look at the Westboro Baptist Church, and we see how far removed they are from mainstream Christianity, and we tend to think that, oh well, if there's another religion in another part of the world, the percentages of wingnuts must play out about the same. That there must be very, very, very small number of people that would be as extreme as that, and even people who belong to the Westboro Baptist Church aren't out there killing anybody. They're saying horrible things, but they're contributing to a host of social evils that lead to to prejudices and fag bashing and stuff like that. But they're not actually carrying out these things themselves. And when you talk about people bombing abortion clinics, I mean, that is so rare. So vanishingly rare. Mm-hmm. But this colors our sense. It sort of calibrates for us the idea of what a radical or a fundamentalist or an extremist is. Well, it's if you look at the Pew polls, the number of extremists in certain parts of the world number in the hundreds of millions. Right. Not just one or two local people who might harm you. And if we could appreciate that fact, we as liberals, then we could appreciate the fact that no, there's actually something quite different here, and it's not the same thing as saying. I mean, when we say of sort of Christians in the West, oh well, though they're just the fundamentalists, you don't want to tar everyone with the same brush. Well, that's true. You never want to tar everyone with the same brush. But when you write something off as extremist with respect to Christianity in the West, it's very different than writing people off in another part of the world I mean, the number it's 87% of British
British-born
Muslims, British-born Muslims think
Yes.
that death is what's called for in the case of apostasy.
Yeah.
That is terrifying.
And that was right after 7/7, might I add. That poll was done a month after 7/7, I think, something like that.
Yeah. And with respect to polls, actually, Sam Harris, when he wrote the End of Faith, he cited a Pew poll from 2002, which was looking into the question of suicide bombing. And the numbers there were terrifying, and he disaggregated the numbers so that you could look at it by nationality and according to how they answered, and even the way they binned the numbers skewed it to make it sound not as terrifying as it is. But what it boils down to is that there were, at least in 2002, and according to this poll, hundreds of millions of Muslims who thought that suicide bombing was justified in defense of Islam. Because that's how the question was phrased. Not in defense of their country, not if you're being attacked, in defense of Islam.
Yeah.
Right? Now, how many Christians and how many Jews in the world will you find who believe that in defense of their faith you're allowed to engage in suicide bombing, right? So these are differences that make a difference. And whether you think, oh, well, that's not in the Quran or not, is irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
You got to, where are the crazy beliefs coming from, and where are the craziest and most extreme beliefs concentrated? And the numbers are not the same. The religions don't all teach the same thing. They don't teach extremism to the same degree. And we liberals need to be alive to these differences. This is data that we have.
Well, this actually goes back, part of this goes back to the conversation you guys were having earlier before I got on, but I do understand also the liberal position. Again, I'm liberal, but of not wanting to ally yourself with extremist Christians, fundamentalist Christians, evangelical Christians on the subject of Islam. They are the ones who are speaking the loudest about this. And liberals feel very reticent to ally themselves with these people. I can understand that, and it is a valid concern. Because a lot of those people, a lot of those evangelicals, etc., do it out of ignorance or racism or both. But that doesn't mean that, a broken clock isn't right twice a day, or once a day if you use the 24-hour clock. They could still be right about that and wrong about everything else. It doesn't mean that you can't take that same position on that particular issue. We really have to learn to be far more nuanced, which I find ironic having to tell liberals, because liberals really are the ones who started the idea of nuance in the first place. But I think it's necessary to remind people that yes, you can oppose these things. You can be against these movements in the Muslim world. Some of them are frankly relatively new, and for a variety of reasons. But you can oppose them without being a racist, and you should really vociferously, point out the fact that you're not doing it for racist reasons to help other people who wish to do the same. I think it's really incumbent upon us to start a movement, to start an awareness campaign within our own so-called new atheist movement. Although I've been an atheist for I guess 25 some years, so I'm not a new atheist, but I know we don't officially like to have say that we have a movement, but we have some sort of thing going on at least.
But Nathaniel, can I just ask a question? Do you remember what happened in Sudan, like, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, when a little girl named her teddy bear Muhammad?
Yes, I remember. No, it was a teacher. It was a teacher who named the teddy bear in the classroom Muhammad, and she was going to be executed. Okay. She was flown. I believe she was flown out. There was an uproar, and she was flown out, and
she was
never
British,
to return.
Yeah,
now, she was.
Do you remember the reaction of the Muslims?
Yeah, absolutely.
The Muslims.
Yeah, but I know. It's a generalization, but yeah, they rioted. Absolutely, it was.
Okay, how many Muslims do you see on the street when you hear about the beheadings in Iraq?
Yeah, I completely agree. Look, ISIS is, again, I think a lot of people will say a lot of people in the Muslim world will say they oppose ISIS, but at the same time they support, in a sense, movements which have led to ISIS and ideologies which have led to the ideologies of ISIS. They have supported, they have
exactly
supported
the problem.
Yeah.
Because most Muslims are better than their God, but they don't go out and say it. They don't make it public.
Right, absolutely, and I understand that. Look, even here in Israel, I know some Arabs here in Israel who are afraid to say that they are atheist. Not because the Israeli authorities can do anything, because you can be an atheist here, nobody gives a damn. In fact, I met more atheists here than anybody anywhere else. But because of what their families would do, and how their families would take it, and how the people in their village would take it, and they would take action into their own hands. And regardless of whether the police show up to defend them or not, they're going to be either ostracized or dead. But that being said, I hasten to add that I actually did serve 20-some years ago with some Bedouins who are Muslim, who volunteered for the position and have very dangerous jobs. And so it's again, I have a very varied view of Islamic communities, Muslim communities across this country and across the world, and varied experiences, actually. Sorry to kill the conversation. That's, you can blame me. There we go. Yeah, there we go. It was whatever 7 or 12-minute lull. I forget. But anyway.
Well, it kind of killed the conversation, and I'm not entirely sure that my question was answered. But hey,
what was the question again?
Well, it goes back a long way. It goes back 15 or 20 minutes ago. I want to know whether it is possible for a Muslim to be a moderate. If so, does he neglect or offload the message of the Quran? Because it seems to me that the Quran is a deeply disturbing
text. If you are my boss, okay, a CEO of one of the largest companies in the Middle East, comes to me, and this was after a board meeting, okay, and he says, okay, can you just stay and we need to discuss, we just need to go over 2 points, okay, so we do this. He turns around to me and says, by the way, do you know that there are scientific miracles in the Quran?
Right.
How do you handle that?
I don't know. How did you handle it?
I didn't. I sat there with an open mouth and I said, okay, I'll have to look into that. Very interesting. I mean, what do you do? How do you act politically correct with a guy who is incredibly influential, and you now say, okay, do I want to maintain my standards or do I want to maintain my job?
I can tell you how I would have answered that, Fred.
How?
What, by keeping my job? Yes, sir. Very interesting, sir.
Does that display your integrity?
No, it doesn't.
It does indeed.
But no, this isn't the point that I'm trying to address. I'm trying to address is what the point I'm trying to address is, what is the true interpretation of Islam or the Quran? And I know there is no answer to this. This is the point I'm trying to make.
No, you can't. There's 1.5 billion different versions of Islam. It all boils down to the Quran being vague and ambiguous. Everybody knows that you need to interpret the Quran. That's why you need the secondary texts. They are also vague and contradicting each other and blah, blah, blah. So you need to interpret those as well. Then you get to the scholars, and now it's wide open for anything that you want, which is why Sunni Muslims, 85% of the Muslims, are trying to smuggle in the Sunnah into scripture. There's more and more Muslims now coming out and saying, well, actually, hadiths are very much like the Quran and very much like scripture, so we should accept them, because then they can prove anything.
Well, I would like to answer DPR's question directly. I would say that yes, you can be a moderate Muslim, but a moderate Muslim is not the same thing as a moderate Christian.
Moderate Christian. Yeah, I don't even know what that would look like. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have this vision. I really want to pick up on Ozzy's point. I think it was such a good point that in North America we have this image of a moderate Christian, you know, being somebody that, you know, your neighbor or somebody you might see in the lineup at the grocery store, and you know, they might have a little cross and a pennant around their neck, and you know that they go to church once in a while, and you know, but they're not trying to push their way onto school boards to get creationism into the classroom, and you can't really tell the difference between a moderate Christian and an atheist. Certainly not in Canada, and I think it's comparable in the States. You really have to go to those core fundamental questions to see the differences. You know, they still send their kids to college and university to get an education, and you know, they put money away in their retirement savings plans, and you know, they're just, you don't see a difference. And then when we talk about extremists, I don't think that the Christian extremists are really all that extreme. That is extremely different from your average American. Right? I mean, we look at when we point to somebody and say, well, this person is an extreme Christian, we're looking at some pretty superficial differences. You know, certainly stopping far short of you know, killing people or suicide bombing and whatnot. I just don't even know what a moderate what is a moderate Muslim? What does that?
Well,
what does that mean?
I think most people. Most Muslims, as we noted, who don't go and you know, they're not jihadis. I think you could probably classify a large section of those as moderate Muslims in some sense. But again, moderate Muslim would not be the same in the same liberal category as a moderate Christian, for example, or a moderate Jew or a moderate Hindu. You know, each moderation by religion is different from another religion in a sense. So I think that, yeah, and you have liberal Muslims too, but once again, liberal Muslims tend to be much more conservative than liberal Christians are about their religion.
But Nathaniel, is that how low our standards are? A moderate Muslim, all that is required is a lack of violence?
That's yeah. Mm-hmm. That I was going to say that, because you're saying, well, I mean, the really extremist ones are violent and, you know, teaching their children how to shoot rifles and strap bombs onto themselves, or whatever image you want to paint there. So the moderates are the ones who don't engage in that sort of violence. So you're kind of saying, like, look, you know, if that Muslim is only as difficult to deal with as the average Phelps family member or WCB, you know, Westboro Baptist Church member, well, then they're just a moderate. You know what I mean? Like, the scale is so far shifted. I just don't.
Yeah. No. Again, it's relative to the religion. So yes, moderate Muslims are more conservative generally overall about their religion than moderate Christians. I think that's just a fact. And you can see that with those Pew polls and other polls about you know, questions they ask about you know, whether they want theocracy or not. That's not. It's not. I'm not saying that they are moderate. I'm just saying that relative to Islam, they would be considered moderate Muslims. Yeah, I'm not so sure that's a good thing, but that's just the way it is. I'm not happy about it. You know. I'm not enthused about it, and I don't give it a pass either. I mean, look, you've spoken to me before. I'm fairly vocal and critical about Islam. You know, but I think that, yeah, you can have moderate Muslims, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. It means still a fairly conservative view of Islam. And to talk about moderation, you would have to look to much more liberal Muslims, of which it is a tiny minority at this point. They do exist, but they are a tiny minority, and even they are still more conservative than, say, liberal Christians overall. I mean, these are generalities, but I think we can agree on them.
And I need to mention something here, because Muslims say Islam is peaceful, and Islam actually means peace. Now that's two blatant lies. All right. Number one, Islam does not mean peace. It just means submission. And the second thing is, the peace that Muslims talk about is not the peace that we are talking about. So if I talk about peace, I'm talking about the absence of violence. What a Muslim talks about when he uses the word peace is that everybody submits to the same identical God. That is peace. So it's a bit misleading when you use this vocabulary, and it's not the same meaning that gets conveyed. All right, you need to be aware of this.
Absolutely, I agree. Look, Islam does not mean peace. It means submission, and it means submission to God. And if that's the kind of peace that will come from it, I want no part of it. And we all know exactly what kind of submission they're talking about in the final analysis. So no, it doesn't mean peace, and that is a blatant lie. And I think that most people, when they hear that Islam is a religion of peace, or Islam means peace, should confront that and say, no, it doesn't, and no, it isn't.
Yeah, and most people don't know that. So.
Yeah.
We've got Ben with us, I think. Ben, welcome.
I think it was addressed, but I did want to point out that when we're using, like moderate extremists, we're just making a cultural comparison to, like the American culture, where we've had stronger law enforcement against extremism, forcing extremism into the channels of, like, free speech and away from violence. And versus there are some other countries that may not have as organized a history as, America, having had free speech defined in since the beginning, has had to be to try to keep that, so that bombings cannot be just tolerated as disorder or during the democratic process, that they are inherently like a threat to it.
Right. Well, it depends on when you say moderate, what you actually are asking. Do you mean moderate by our standards or moderate by their standards? That really is the question.
I think what I'm saying is, when I notice people talking about it, they seem to automatically grab those people's standards. So when I know those people sounds wonderful, but the other person's standards of, like, an extremist Muslim versus a moderate Muslim. So you just were mentioning that, in horror, the idea of, oh, okay, that Muslim does not commit violence. That person is inherently a moderate. No, and I don't think that there is a very good standard for, or like, how well does this comply to, like, the UN declared rights of the human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Which is why I said, if you really want a moderate compared to you, you would have to look more to the liberal Muslims rather than the moderate Muslims. If you're using a comparison, on a Western basis or something, you can't really compare the quote-unquote moderate Muslims as being anything related to moderation in our society overall. You would have to look to the liberal Muslims, people like Urshid Manji, etc. So it's really relative to what you're talking about. If the question is, are there moderate Muslims compared to Western moderation, then yes, but they're a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. If the question is, are there moderate Muslims in comparison to the rest of the Islamic world, yes, but it's not the moderation that you're looking for or imagining.
Ben, I'm kind of tempted to pick you up on a point that you may have, I kind of think you smuggled in, and just I'll give you a chance to clarify it, I guess. But when you first making this point about how there are obvious ways, obvious differences between how religious moderates and religious extremists express themselves, that is, differences between, say, in the Sudan versus the United States. I think you had made a comment, and again, on a live broadcast, it's easy to mishear someone, so I'll apologize in advance if that's what happened, but you said something like where there are laws, like in America, where there are laws that kind of prohibit. That is, I got the impression from what you were saying that America kind of nipped religious violence in the bud, and that's why amongst the religious extremists in the U.S., the worst you see is, for the most part, obviously there's exceptions, but the worst you see is people carrying grumpy signs, right? I guess maybe I should just ask you then, what is your view then on why religious extremism plays out so differently in the States as opposed to other countries?
I think it's not just a law, but also there is a cultural thing that I'm not going to say, of course, America has no violence. We all know that that is quite not true. But I'm thinking in terms of like, after like one of the last great political violences that was sustained was the fighting the civil rights movement in the South, like how African American churches got bombed and stuff, and there was a point where it just became okay, you can't overlook that anymore, that like even J. Edgar Hoover was forced off of his duff to get the FBI and stop just infiltrating left-wing groups, but also start trying to infiltrate right-wing groups for that, and then bringing the violence down. That it would not be good to business as normal for that kind of excess to go on.
Well, it's funny that on your list you're also excluding things like Branch Davidian and Ruby Ridge and things like that, where, I mean, I guess you're looking at big scale things, like obviously the establishment of civil rights in the U.S. through the 60s. There was a lot of violence spread over a large geographic area, but I'm including things like these little encampments of religious / politically motivated people that arm themselves and will get engaged in armed conflict with the government or with other members of the public. And I'm not wagging a finger when I say this, because we've had this happen in Canada as well, although we've generally got the camps shut down before shots were fired. I would speculate as to why that happens here and not there, but anyway, I'm more curious to hear what you'd say.
I think that was a problem with law enforcement tactics beforehand, that the Ruby Ridge and the Waco were situations that spiraled out of control, and that there was not the political will within the law enforcement to get them back in control. Specifically Waco, they had the hostage negotiators talking with the Branch Davidians, but they were not working hand in hand with the hostage rescue team, the commandos of the FBI, and they wanted to, the hostage rescue team just wanted to be done with it, storm the compound, whatever is necessary to get this done, versus the hostage negotiators did want to take their time and talk them out. And this is a process within law enforcement where they're trying to refine it and bring about more peaceful end. Like, specifically in Michigan, unfortunately, no convictions resulted from it, but there was the, I'm going to mangle their name, but the Tory, he in Michigan was a smaller militia group with guns who allegedly were planning to commit violence against law enforcement, and they were infiltrated.
Ben, pardon me, Ben, if I can just interrupt. Not to, I just don't want to necessarily go into the details of all the.
Yeah.
Because I mean that actually would be an interesting topic, sort of what happened in those things. But I think what I'm asking about, because we're sort of doing these cross-cultural comparisons, is that I'm saying that when you have a group of religious / politically motivated people in an encampment, and they're armed and they're willing to go to war with whoever doesn't agree with them or treads on them in some way, Canada has a way of dealing with it. In the States, you know, the point you're making is that I mean, you may have some concerns about how law enforcement proceeded, but the point is that at Waco, for example, they were seen as being outside the law. And maybe I'm wondering if the other two callers might want to address this, is what happens if you get an encampment of you know, religiously motivated, what you might call religious extremists. Outside of North America, how is this dealt with in, you know, in the Sudan or Iraq or anywhere else? Like, how is this dealt with?
You exterminate them if they're not on your side.
Well, no, I mean the government or the I mean, because my impression is that. Oh,
but
okay.
It depends. I mean, if you're in, you know, Waziristan or something, then yeah, you have full-pitched battles and wars involving extremists and the government. Frankly, a lot of people know, but it is quite true that a lot of Pakistani troops have died fighting these extremists, while their intelligence services are still funding them and on their side. It's a bizarre situation, but yeah, it depends where you are. But look, in most countries in the world that are not democracies, they would wipe them out. Sure, if they're not on their side, if they're not funding them, then they're a threat to the government. They would wipe them out.
Yeah, well, our policy here tends to be that you don't have to be on the government side or opposed to the government or whatever. Do what you want to do, whatever. Oh, now you've got a bunch of guns stockpiled there. That we're going to deal with. And if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the assessment there isn't based on how well armed people are, but rather whether what they're pushing for is aligned with the current theocracy.
Well, yeah. Look at how they deal with dissidents in a lot of countries. They just put them away. So if you start a compound full of dissidents, they're just going to either put you away or exterminate you as a threat to the government. You know.
I think one of the issues, I'm just going to sort of make a comment to kind of put a cap on it for me on this segment, anyways, that we get this topic comes up sometimes. I mean, we have a lot of fun here, sort of talking about creationism and, you know, evangelicals and whatnot. And to me, it's sort of the low-hanging fruit to talk about, well, how do we deal with, you know, the end is near, John 3:16, creationism, you know, that crowd within the States? Because I think whenever this comes up, like, what are we to do about this part of the world and about this? It's not the geography; it's the mentality of people who's, you know, as Fred pointed out. I mean, education is a big issue. I think the thing I really struggle with this issue that, you know, Ben Affleck and Ben Stiller, that's not his name.
No.
Sam Harris.
Yeah.
Where,
I know he's remarked on the fact that he looks like Ben Stiller. Yeah. He
does look a bit like Ben Stiller. But I think it's hard because I feel very disconnected from that level of theocracy and those particular cultures and those particular theocracies. And just to watch a lot of this stuff go by on the news, and like with ISIS, you know, several years ago it was Al-Qaeda, and then now with ISIS, I have to admit, and I wonder if other viewers would feel the same way about this, I feel a sense of real helplessness, underinformed, and just shoulder-shrugging helpless. Like, what are we to do about this?
Well, that's a problem of education on our end, actually. Look.
Well, okay, it may be a problem. But what's the solution?
Education, and Frank.
I think that's a nice answer. I don't disagree with that. But education takes time.
Yeah.
What is the immediate response that we should take?
There is no immediate solution. The solution
I didn't
is
say there's
time.
an immediate solution. I said, what is the immediate response that we should take?
I don't know. That's the real problem, and I don't think that anyone else knows either. To be quite frank, I don't think that.
But you must have a view yourself.
Well, look, as to whether or not we should be bombing ISIS, I think
Yeah, let's take that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that at some point it became necessary, and I'm not enthused about it. I'm not happy about it. But I think
support it.
Yes, I support it because, frankly, they go against everything that we're supposed to stand for, and they're.
Who is we that you talk about?
I would say the West and other democracies, Western-style democracies.
I know that I'm playing devil's advocate here, but we, as the West, have done some pretty shitty things. Like,
absolutely.
For example, the invasion of 2003, and that has consequences. And I think it was a total mistake to have done that.
It was a clusterfuck.
Sorry?
It was a clusterfuck.
Yeah, and you know, I think we were led in there. I'm referring specifically here to Tony Blair rather than Bush, but Tony Blair led us into a situation on the basis of a lie, and we haven't left the situation in any better state than it was before, and it could be argued, and I think persuasively argued, that we've left it in a worse state than it was in 2003. So what are we doing now? We're just getting into another clusterfuck?
No, I mean...
clean up the mess that we left over? What's going on?
Look, I don't dispute the mess that we made in Iraq, but there are far more factors involved in what's happening in Syria and the emergence of ISIS and other groups which have emerged around Iraq, just excluding the problem that you had in Iraq. This is not, revolutions in Syria are not a new thing. It's happened before. Most people don't know, but Assad's father absolutely bulldozed an entire town because religious extremists took it over. I believe it was 1980, Hama, Syria, and turned it into basically a parking lot or the equivalent thereof, absolutely slaughtering tens of thousands of people in the process in just a few days because they were revolutionaries. They were jihadis, actually. So this is not a new phenomenon to Syria or other places in the Arab world. Our blundering into Iraq did set off certain things, but it's not, in a sense, it didn't create a unique situation. These things have been happening there for a long time. The Kurds tried an uprising.
Except they've been happening. They've been happening for a very long time. I totally agree with everything you said. Why doesn't the West accept the general policy that countries should be left for self-determination? Rather, what right do we have to interfere?
Because we signed conventions saying that we wouldn't allow things like genocide, and ISIS specifically stated that they are conducting genocide. We cannot allow this to happen. I don't know. I mean, I know this is a legalistic term, but you're a lawyer. You understand. This ISIS said that they are going to exterminate certain groups of people because they are heretics and blasphemers and non-believers. We cannot. We have signed declarations saying we would not allow this to happen ever again. We should act on them, and we can.
Which ones are you referring to?
Well, the first of all, the agreement of against genocide signed by the
Geneva Convention.
Yeah, the Geneva Convention itself. But
those are quite different things.
But there was an agreement to stop genocide.
No. Let's be clear here. The Geneva Conventions have got nothing to say about the Genocide Convention, which came much later.
Right, and the Geneva Convention, to be fair, doesn't actually state that you have to interfere with people who are not observing the Geneva Convention, but we did state, and not only we, but most Western countries and some non-Western countries stated that we would never again accept genocide, a stated genocide against an entire people. I mean, the definition of genocide, we would be forced to act. That is something that we should not overlook. I mean, we did not act in Rwanda.
That doesn't give you a right as a state, any state, to intervene with any situation which could be described as self-determination.
Except when they openly state that they're going to exterminate entire peoples.
So what, does that give us the moral obligation?
It does. Absolutely does.
Well, now you're talking about two different things. You're talking about the moral obligation or the legal obligation. There's no legal obligation to interfere.
No, actually there is. I believe there is, because during the Rwanda genocide, I'll call it no other thing, there was a very famous memo sent down by the White House not to use the word genocide because it would legally obligate the United States to intervene, which is why they were very cagey about never using that word. And much to, I think, their shame, they refused to recognize it as genocide because they saw no political will to intervene. So because they knew that if they did say the word genocide, they would be legally obligated. Now, I'd have to look up the law that actually states this, but they themselves stated that they would be legally obligated. So there is a convention we signed and others have signed against genocide, and if somebody comes out and says it's genocide and we recognize it as being genocide, we have to legally intervene, and so does every other Western nation, and so do most other law-abiding nations in the United Nations. Which is why, might I add, if you remember, nobody from the Russians and the Chinese wanted to recognize that there was a genocide going on in the Sudan, and we're blocking every single bill going through that stating in the Security Council that there was a genocide going on in the Sudan, because had the UN recognized that there is a genocide going on, they would have legally been obligated to send people to stop it. There was a debate over that word in the UN for years about the Sudan. So I think we are obligated, but if you want my opinion as to how long we are obligated, I'm not sure. I don't want to be there for too long, frankly. I don't think that it's going to solve anything. I think that it really is something that the people locally will have to sort out. But as to bombing them to stop genocide of Yazidis or what have you, then yes, I am for that. As to an ongoing campaign, I'm not so sure we can actually defeat them this way. I think it's fairly clear we can't, and I think it's fairly clear that the people locally have to have some sort of revolution, not only on the ground, but in thought and ideology and theology, to terminate this kind of cancer and disease which crop up in their section of the woods all the time. That's my view.
I would think if you want a way to do that, economics would be the best weapon for that. If everyone has the economic incentive to keep trouble from brewing, trouble will not brew. So that would probably be the only workable thing I could come up with. But at the same time, trying to balance that against the economic incentives for conflict. Messing with the economy is hard.
They're going to fall apart internally because they're going to fall prey to the old thing that as long as you have a common enemy, you are strong. But as soon as that common enemy falls away, you disintegrate because you start infighting. This is exactly what's going to happen there.
I agree, but to go to the economic point, how are you going to stir the economy when you have this kind of situation? I mean, you're not going to have businesses wanting to go in there and set up shop. They're not going to want to take the risk. Look at Somalia. I mean, it's a bloody wasteland, and there, it has been for a long time, and there's very few businesses. There's only local people who come back to Somalia who try to set up businesses, and some succeed on a moderate scale, but most are, bombed out of existence. So the same can be said with the situation in the quote-unquote caliphate. First of all, they're not allowing Western people in, and the people who could go to Iraq right now are not really going to be interested in setting up car businesses and washing machine businesses and computer businesses because of what could possibly happen in the next week or two.
Have you guys heard things like that? With that in that area in the northeast, you have wheat farmers. And wheat is a real commodity in that area. So what Daesh have done, they've gone to the farmers and said, okay, well, you can come back. I know that you're afraid of us, but you can come back, and if you convert to Islam and you pay us $500, you're allowed to run your business. And then the farmer says, are you out of your tree? I mean, what am I going to do there? Why should I convert, and why should I pay you anything? He says, well, in that case, we're going to take your wheat. So we're not stealing it because we gave you an option, but we're just going to take it and then we're going to distribute it as we see fit.
Of course.
They are exactly what you're saying. They're destroying the businesses, and nobody in their right mind is going to want to set up shop there.
Right. I mean, and plus, ISIS themselves glorify not only beheading, Westerners on the internet, but mass executions of everybody else who they don't think are pure Muslims. I mean, you saw the videos of like, what was it, 400 people en masse being gunned down into shallow graves, which they were forced to dig themselves. This is this has been going actually on for quite a while, far before they were executing, beheading Western journalists and the like. And people in the Arab world, people in Iraq, have been seeing this for several months beforehand. They're not stupid. They're not going to go back to ISIS-dominated areas just because, they've been offered some sort of amnesty. They don't trust that kind of group, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't either. If ISIS told me, well, you can come in and set up shop or even do a documentary, I wouldn't believe them. Screw that, no way. This is not a sane organization in any sense of the terms. They are absolute barbarians, and for that reason alone, I'm not opposed to bombing them. I just don't think that we should do an extended campaign. I mean, I agree with DPR on that level that we're not going to solve it just by bombing people. We are going to stop certain actions, but we're not going to solve this entire situation just by a bombing campaign, even a protracted one as they claim that it's going to take. I don't think that is going to be the final answer. And it's unfortunate that there is no other quick solution. I just don't see one, really.
There are no quick solutions.
Yeah, this is going to take a long time, and it really is going to be up to the people who live there to make that difference, to change the dynamic on the ground. It's going to be up to those people there. Look, ISIS wants to do something which I said should happen years and years ago, which is, trisecting the state of Iraq. I think that should have been done the moment we got into Iraq, to have any sense whatsoever of saving the day. So, okay, on that score, okay, fine. I agree. That's what should happen. I agree that the Kurds should have their independent state. I absolutely agree with that. But it's going to take a bit more after the sectioning up of Iraq to actually end the dynamic on the ground, which has produced ISIS, not only in Iraq but in Syria.
But think it through. Let them establish a state. Then what? What happens next?
Well, as far as I can see, they have, and the world's not accepting it, and good for the world. You know, what else is there to be done apart from that diplomatically? We're not talking to them, and they're not talking to us.
So what does that mean? So the thing is that a lot of Muslims have this dream, all right? They have this dream that there's a caliphate and there's a caliph, and you have the pure Sharia-run country. Because at the moment there is no Sharia-run country where the pure Sharia reigns. Now you're supposed to have this. So I maintain, let them.
Yes.
Let them have their country. Let them run Sharia and see how it fails and how it falls flat on its back.
Right, I agree. I don't think, again, I think that, you know, let them destroy each other. But in terms of standing by and watching genocide, no, I won't allow that. Other than that,
that's the problem, yeah.
That's other than that, I'm up for debate and I'm up for a negotiation as to what to do. But I think you're right. I think that, you know, they will destroy each other. Look at the imams in Iran. The people hate the imams. Of course, the problem is that they can't really get them out of power right now. They tried and they failed. And maybe they will succeed over time, but it's a long-term project. That may be the case we have with ISIS. It may be a very long-term project, but you know, in Iraq is not like Iran. Iraq is a country armed to the teeth, where the average civilian has an AK-47 or access to one. So it is not the same situation you have in Iran. And it is far more tribal than Iran has ever been in modern history. So it is not something which I think is comparative to Iran. But I think that you still are possibly looking at a decades-long problem, which is not going to go away, and which I think, you know, while people might get tired of it, well, tough shit. That's the world you live in. I get tired of hearing about taxes. Tough shit. That's the world I live in. You know, just because you're tired of it doesn't mean that you know, you have a pass on avoiding it, or especially if it affects you, and it does. It affects everybody in the world, everybody who depends on oil or depends on anything that comes out of that region, which is mostly oil. Let's be frank, but there you go. It affects us all, and I think that we really should be cognizant of the fact that it's a rather important problem, regardless of whether we want to be in there long term or not.
So I think DPR, you need to acknowledge that it's a very easy, very short question and a very long and very complex answer.
Yeah, I'm surprised we made it. I'm surprised we made it that far through this topic before the first time somebody mentioned oil.
Yeah, well, it had to come up. I mean, I'm cognizant of the fact. But yeah, it's a tired argument for me. But yeah, it does have some merit. It is important. Anyway, I'm curious what DPR thinks.
Well, I'm aware of the fact that we've overrun by 30 minutes or so, and I think it's a great conversation, and let's carry it on the next show. But let's wrap this one up.
All right. Thank you.
But thank you everyone that has contributed. We'll catch up with you all soon. Thank you very much.